Praise God. Welcome to part 7 of E.J. Waggoner against Kellogg's Pantheism. We'll begin with a word of prayer. Kind and everlasting Father in heaven, we thank you for the gift of life. Thank you for the blessings that we've received. We thank you for the gift of thy Son, Jesus Christ, who cleanses us from all unrighteousness, O my Savior. As we are going to continue with our session, may you speak unto our hearts. May you give us wisdom. May you impart unto us understanding, that we may understand our history aright, that we may understand the truths that you gave in our history, O dear God. For we have nothing to fear, but as we shall forget, you are leading and teaching in our past history. And so, dear God, may you give us thy Spirit in a double measure, in a triple measure, in a superabundant measure, oh dear God, that we may indeed understand aright our history, and therefore understand what we need to do at this time to know our identity as Adventists in this world full of the errors of the serpent. What I have not prayed, may thy Spirit intercede for me with groanings that cannot be uttered, for I pray this, trusting and believing in the precious name of Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, so we'll continue, and as you can remember, our point of departure is the fact that the letter that E.J. White wrote to Waggoner in October 9th, 1903, where she was very unequivocal that it was at that time that Waggoner was just in danger. Like she said that, I paraphrase, that she had much confidence in E.J. Waggoner, but just then, that is October 9th, 1903, that just then E.J. Waggoner was in danger of accepting incorrect views of God as presented in the new book, Living Temple. And so we have seen the significance of that quote, and we have let it have a latitude of thought and a latitude of implication to interpreting the thought of E.J. Waggoner up to that time in 1903. And so we are going to have some more blocks to the structure, that the narrative that we are building, to show that indeed before 1903 there was no pantheism in Waggoner, because the circumstantial evidence just does not agree. And I believe that when we even survey the primary evidence, that is, we survey Waggoner's own writings, we are not going to find any agreement whatsoever with the pantheism. There might be difficult expressions here and there, but that is very much okay, because the Bible also exhibits the same. But in the whole, or in the main, we do not find pantheism in E.J. Waggoner. And so let's today start our study from Dr. David Paulson, because we are going to look at a letter that E.J. White wrote to A.G. Daniels concerning David Paulson. So you remember that in our part 2, we indeed established that it was David Paulson that W.A. Spicer, who had revealed the early proofs of Living Temple, had written to, and Paulson had given a positive response. And here it is. You can see it. You can see it there. You can see it there. I don't know if it is recording, but anyway, let's read. In talking with one of the authors, this is again the book W.A. Spicer, How the Spirit of Prophecy Met a Crisis, written in 1934. So this is, believe, page 17 in the original version, but it is page 13. So I wanted, yes. head, that is Dr. David Paulson, as we have established. I mentioned my feelings that wrong ideas might be obtained from the language in certain portions of the forthcoming book. You can even listen to how W.S. Spicer is writing words, like wrong ideas, and might be obtained from the language in certain points of the forthcoming book. Like if you read the book in and of itself, you might get wrong ideas. My medical friend looked over the matter and wrote to me of his conviction that the matter question was right and in harmony with our message. So David Paulson wrote back to, we had seen that letter in our part 2. David Paulson wrote to W.S. Spicer and told him that the matter questioned was right and in harmony with our message. However, differently, truths might be expressed from the scientific standpoint. And so you can see this idea that whatever was expressed in the book, these people really had no problem in it. And they had felt and they had thought that truly that presented the position that Adventists had believed up to that point, especially the advancing light of the third angel's message that was being shared then by E.J. Waggoner, A.T. Jones, W.W. Prescott, that it was just that it was maybe expressed in terms which are scientific and maybe philosophical, but in the main, the book really expressed the position that Adventists had taken. He felt we ought to be ready to accept advancing light. To reflect our personal situation as we were feeling our way along, I quote as follows a letter that I wrote to him in reply. We checked that in our part 2. Anyway, I want to proceed with that. So, W.S. Spicer continues that once Kellogg, very shortly, you can see, very shortly, the author of the forthcoming book, that is Living Temple, returned from abroad. So Kellogg had gone to abroad after writing that book. There were problems in the book, as notified by W.S. Spicer. And Prescott. So when Kellogg comes back, W.S. Spicer meets Kellogg, and you can see in the conversation that something that was not captured in the book in a clear way is now being brought forth in a personal correspondence with Kellogg. So W.S. Spicer gets additional insights on what is the standpoint from which Kellogg is writing. Is it just that his thoughts are liable to misinterpretation, or as in he means them to be understood in that way? And so that is an advantage that E.J. Waggoner did not have. E.J. Waggoner did not have the advantage of knowing what the doctor meant in person, or meant as regards to the sentiments that he had written. And so Waggoner did not have this advantage to know exactly what the doctor meant by his expressions that he had used where? He had used in the book Living Temple. So you can see this additional insight. Like sitting down, this is how the Spirit of Prophecy Met a Crisis by W.S. Spicer, written in 1934. Sitting down with no thought that there could be any difference of a really controversial nature, and with the heartiest friendly feelings, you can see even W.S. Spicer is like, doesn't think that there is a really big difference. It is just a misstatement which can be corrected, which can be modified, and so that it can give the right expression. So sitting down with no thought that there could be any difference of a really controversial nature, and with the heartiest of friendly feelings, personally, I was at once in the midst of a discussion of the most controversial questions. Instead of things in the book being inadvertently overdrawn because of employment of scientific terms unfamiliar to most of us, I learned that the teaching was conservatively stated in the book. Conservatively, like that, the teaching that Kellogg was trying to make was conservatively. That is, it was not presented in its full-blown terms. It was conservatively expressed. It was put in a halfway, in an equivocal way, so that it is not clear really what he meant. And that was the essence of deception, as we are going to see in a letter that E.G. White wrote to A.G. Daniels. Instead of things in the book being inadvertently overdrawn because of employment of scientific terms unfamiliar to most of us, I learned that the teaching was conservatively stated in the book, that the teaching was really of intent to signify that God was in the things of nature. Where is God? I was asked. I will naturally say he's in heaven. there the Bible pictures the throne of God, all the heavenly beings at his command as messengers between heaven and earth. But I was told that God was in the grass, the plant, and in the trees, with no motions to the grass and the trees about us. With motions to the grass and trees about us as we sat on the open veranda. Where is heaven? I was asked. I had an idea of the center of the universe with heaven and the throne of God in the midst, but disclaimed any attempt to fix the center of the universe astronomically. But I was urged to understand that heaven is where God is, and God is everywhere, in the grass, in the trees, in all creation. There was no place in the scheme of things for angels going on between heaven and earth, for heaven was here and everywhere. The cleansing of the sanctuary that was taught about was not something in a faraway heaven. The scene is here, the hand pointing at the heart, and there is a sanctuary to be cleansed. To think of God as having a form in the image of which man was made was said to be idolatry. Now listen to that. So, this important insight, this paragraph that we've read, E.J. Waggoner have the advantage of a personal conversation with Kellogg to understand these things and to understand the position that Kellogg was speaking from before making his position and before responding. Because for him, I'd only read the book and maybe just a portion of it. And also, even we're going to see his letter that he did not think that the issue was really pantheism at all, but issue was whether God was dwelling in the temple of a sinful man, or of every man, or only of the righteous. And that is not a pantheistic question, by the way, because if as Prescott held it, that God dwells in the heart of a righteous man, why is that not pantheism? If the question that Waggoner was responding to was pantheism, if the difficulty in the book was really about dwelling in man, in every man, not only on righteous men, if he dwells on righteous men, is that not pantheism? If that is what is to be meant as to be the issue of the book. So the question really, as Waggoner understood it, was not even on the pantheistic basis. It was on how God dwells in man. Does God dwell in the unrighteous man? So I want us now to go to a certain letter from E.G. White, which highlights the nature and the tendency of the teaching in the Living Temple book. The nature and tendency in the Living Temple book. Because it's very much important how we approach the book. Because if you approach it from a standpoint that is not inspired by the spirit of prophecy, you're going to make a mistake. You're going to make an error. You're not going to see what is the problem with the book. And you might think the things expressed there is exactly what is error. And I am sorry to say that a few of our really honest friends have made that mistake. They rushed forward to read the book, and after reading the book, they think the thing there is what is condemned according to their own perception. But I want to urge us to have a personal conversation with J.H. Kellogg so that you can see that what he meant to say in the book was pantheism and not just the indwelling presence of Christ through his spirit. For him, it was not. For him, he wanted God in his substance to be diffused through nature, and E.G. White is very clear on that. Where he rebukes Kellogg for having the personality of God as an essence pervading all nature, and that is very much different from the indwelling presence of God and this and his Son through the Spirit. Anyway, let us read this letter that was written to A.G. Daniel. This is September 18, 1903. It is going to give us a handle, as it to say, or a criteria to really see what was in the Living Temple crisis. And so this was a letter, and it is a letter written to A.G. Daniels, and it mentioned a few things about David Paulson. And we are going to see that the same things that were mentioned about David Paulson, to an extent, can also apply to the position that Waggoner took in the letter that he wrote to W.W. Prescott in January 14th, 1903. So we are going to see, and we are going to see that these people were really in the same frame of mind. So let's see. So the letter is letter 271 letter 271, 1903, letter 271B, 1903. So it's a letter written from E.G. White to E.G. Daniels. Dear brother, I have written a short letter to you this afternoon, but I wish to add a few more words. Now listen to this point. This is very important. The enemy has put into Dr. Kellogg's mind the very words that I speak, so that his ideas can be set forth as ideas exactly similar to those that I have taught. End of the first sentence. Let that sink in. So as you approach Living Temple, you first of all must know that the very words that E.G. White speaks are the very words that Kellogg is using to make his case, or to propagate his doctrines. And the enemy has put into Dr. Kellogg's mind the very words that I speak. So the words you find there are the very words that you find in E.G. White. And if I may add, are the very words that you will find in E.J. Waggoner. And they are the very words that you are going to find in W.W. Prescott prior to 1903. You're going to find in our periodicals, even the Present Truth magazine. You're going to find the very same words. And even J.H. Kellogg himself uses the very same words before that time. But there is something that is happening here. It is not in the words. Let us read on. Let's pick it up again. The enemy has put into Dr. Kellogg's mind very words that I speak, so that his ideas can be sent forth as ideas exactly similar to those I have taught. Thus, it is claimed that the teachings of the book Living Temple are in accordance with the teachings of my writings. There is a similarity of expression. It is true. That is Christ is saying through E.G. White that there is a similarity of expression in the book Living Temple with E.G. White, and I might add with E.J. Waggoner and with W.W. Prescott. And because there are so many numerous letters by J.H. Kellogg where he says that Waggoner, David Paulson, Prescott, and H.T. Johnson had taught the same things, even W.M.C. Wilcox had taught the same things prior, yet he is the only one who is being crucified for teaching the same thing. So I want us to see his accusation from the lenses of SOP. SOP says that there is a similarity of expressions. It is true. And many of the words are the same as the word used by me in writing out that the instruction that God has given me in regards to God in nature. So E.G. White had been given instructions in regards to God in nature. And I can say E.J. Waggoner had also been given instruction in regards to God in nature. Yet Kellogg does what? He takes those words and Satan clothes his pantheistic ideas in those words, and he presents them just as the same thing that E.G. White had taught, or E.J. Waggoner or Prescott had taught prior to that time. And by the way, this will help us to understand what is really taking place, because people were really confused. And the fact that the enemy clothed the truth about God in nature, or what I might call the indwelling presence of Christ and the Father through the Spirit. Since the Spirit, the enemy of souls had clothed Pantheism in those terms, in those phrases, in the same terminology, it is for that reason that E.J. Waggoner has been sidelined, because people think that the same content found in Living Temple is the same content that Waggoner had been teaching. So they reject Waggoner, not knowing that these things were just having the same facade, but the same exterior. Like they were looking the same, but they were not the same thing. Anyway, I have belabored that point enough. So there is a similarity of expression. It is true. Many of the words are the same as the words used by me in writing out the instruction that God has given me in regards to God in nature. And the position taken in this book can be interpreted by a mind under deception of Satan to be exactly the same as the position taken in my writings. So a mind under the deception
of Satan might look at the expressions there and think that E.G. White had taught the same thing. And Waggoner is also in the same danger in his writings. Like, a mind under the deception of Satan might read the wordings there and think that the thought that J.H. Kellogg is trying to propagate is the same thought that had been propagated by E.J. Waggoner prior to that time. My words are interpreted to mean almost the opposite of their real meaning. Now listen to that. The words of E.G. White are interpreted to mean opposite of almost their real meaning. And I believe it's the same thing with E.J. Waggoner's words. The words of E.J. Waggoner are interpreted in a way to mean the very opposite of what E.J. Waggoner meant prior to that time. This confuses the minds of the brethren and sisters in our church. Now listen to this about David Paulson. Dr. Paulson's mind is becoming confused. He thinks he understands Dr. Kellogg's teaching, but he does not discern. Now listen to this. Wow. Dr. Paulson's mind is becoming confused. He thinks he understands Dr. Kellogg's teaching. And I'm sorry to say, E.J. Waggoner was also thinking that he was understanding Kellogg's teaching. And you can read that in the January 14th, 1903 letter. E.J. Waggoner was truly thinking that he was understanding the doctor. Because we are going to read that letter before. We pray that we have time to read the letter before time ends. Dr. Paulson's mind is becoming confused. He thinks he understands Dr. Kellogg's teaching, but he does not discern who is Dr. Kellogg's instructor. I am bidden to say to our people, do not confound the words of Sister White with the deceptive fallacies of the enemy. Extreme views of God in nature undermine the foundation of the personality of God and the ministration of the angels. A confused mass of spiritualistic ideas take the place of faith in a personal God. I take no stock whatever in some, not all by the way, in some of the principles that are now being advocated. So listen to that carefully. It's a very packed paragraph. Dr. Paulson's mind is becoming confused. He thinks he understands Dr. Kellogg's teaching, but he does not discern who is Kellogg's instructor. By the way, that's very true. Even for Waggoner, that was the same. Waggoner thought that he understood the doctor, but that was not the case. Waggoner really did not understand Dr. Kellogg's position. Let me just get that for us. Okay, it's not that one. Okay, let me just a minute. Yeah, this is the letter by this is a letter by this is a letter by this is the letter by E.J. Waggoner to W.W. Prescott. I do not know. This is, I think, page 2. I do not know what Dr. Kellogg may or may not believe in his heart concerning the atonement, etc. Now listen to that. He does not know. He has not had that is what I've said earlier. He has not had the advantage of having a personal interview with Kellogg to know really what Kellogg really means by what he says. And he's very honest with that. Yeah, this is what I wanted. It says, E.J. Waggoner says, now I know that you will appreciate the fact that it is impossible for me to put myself in the place of those who have been talking lately with Dr. Kellogg. Wow. As he doesn't know. He doesn't understand. He doesn't know from which point Kellogg is speaking. And he cannot put himself in that position. That is what he's saying. And when Waggoner is evaluating Living Temple, the book, he doesn't have this background information. about these things. But I am bound to say that having read a good portion of his book, since I received your letter, I cannot detect anything radically wrong in it. Very much true. Because as we have read the letter that E.G. White has written to E.G. Daniels, like the very words of E.G. White are used. Similar expressions are used. And if similar expressions are used, and Waggoner is reading that book, he's not seeing what Kellogg is believing in private, but he's seeing what E.G. White had taught regarding God's in nature. And so it leads Waggoner to endorse the book, not because he's endorsing pantheistic theology, but because he's thinking that the same thing that he has been teaching, or the same thing that they have been teaching as the advanced truth of the third angel's message, are the same things that Kellogg is expressing, and maybe to an extreme expression, overdone expression. But in the main, he thinks that Kellogg is teaching the same thing basically. So he has not had the advantage that W.S. Spicer had of having a personal conversation and knowing exactly that Kellogg really denied God being in heaven, but as God as something diffused, a perfume diffused throughout nature. Now listen to how Waggoner is explaining his position, by the way. Now I know that you will appreciate the fact that it is impossible for me to put myself in the place of those who have been talking lately with Dr. Kellogg. But I am bound to say that having read a good portion of his book, since I received your letter, I cannot detect anything radically wrong in it. I can see nothing that cannot be remedied by, now listen to this, I cannot see anything that cannot be remedied by judicious editing. It is really far less extravagant in the expressions that I have expected. Like he has, now listen to that, that it is like not extravagant in the expression used as I thought. As in the expression used. Now, we have just read what E.G. White wrote, that the expression used that we had read here, we had read in the letter that E.G. White wrote to E.G. Daniels, there is similarity of expressions. The living temple are, as in, the enemy has put in Dr. Kellogg's mind the very words that I speak. So, Waggoner, looking at those expressions, that he says that they are less extravagant. Because why? Because the enemy has covered pantheism in the expression that E.G. White was using, and the expressions that Waggoner had been using prior to that time. Let's just read that again. It is really far less extravagant in its expression than I had expected, and some overstatements, okay, he is even recognized that they are overstatements, and some overstatements might be omitted or modified without much difficulty. Listen to that. Like he was even recommending that there should be an omission there should be omission of certain statements which without any difficulty. It is not put as we should say it, and he is recognized that it is not put as we should say it. That is a matter of course, but this is not surprising considering his past experience. He's saying that considering Kellogg's past experience with pantheism, when he recognized that when the doctor first connected with the sanitarium, he had expounded views similar to pantheism. He had not known how to relate God and nature. That is when Kellogg began as a medical doctor. So it is not surprising that he might be overusing, he might be expressing his view in stronger terms, or in terms which border to pantheism. On the whole, now listen to that. On the whole, I cannot see any reason why the book, with such emendation as I feel sure Dr. Kellogg will accept. He was even thinking Dr. Kellogg will accept the suggestions to modify those expressions. I think we have seen W. Spicer also, when he met Kellogg after Kellogg coming from abroad, that is Europe, he had thought that there was not really a big doctrinal difference. Let's just recapitulate that in a minute. Like he had thought, now we had read this one, like sitting down with no thought that there will be any difference of a really controversial nature, and with that taste of friendly feelings. Personally, so I was at once in the midst of a discussion of the most controversial questions. Anyway, so you can see even Spicer never thought there was a real doctrinal difference. So even Waggoner was thinking that Kellogg will accept those corrections so that the book can give the right relationship between God and nature in an ambiguous way. On the whole, I cannot see any reason why the book, with such emendations as I feel sure Dr. Kellogg would accept, should not be published. Really, if I had been present, I cannot see from the book itself. Now listen to, Waggoner is really limiting himself here. I cannot see from the book itself, not from what Waggoner, not from what Kellogg had been saying or teaching in private, but I cannot see from the book itself, but that I should have been compelled to stand with A.T. Jones. Of course, I read it with no knowledge of what Dr. Kellogg may have said in private. You can see there is something Dr. Kellogg is saying in private, which Waggoner does not have the advantage of. He is not speaking from that background knowledge of what Dr. Kellogg is saying in private. And so when he is giving his qualification about the book, he's evaluating it, and what is he saying? He's saying what? He's seeing the expressions of E.G. White. E.J. Waggoner is thinking that Kellogg is still on the same platform of eternal truth that the Adventist faith had been since the personality of God as a being who created man in his own physical image. That the form of man is the form of God. He is thinking that Kellogg has not divorced that position in his theology. Of course, I read it with no knowledge of what Dr. Kellogg may have said in private, but so will the public. Listen to that justification. That since I have read the book with no intimation of what Kellogg might have taught in private or might have believed in private, the public will also read it the same way. And so truly, there really should be no problem with publishing the book. And that's a very reasonable argument to an extent. I think that the book is better calculated to do good with other books than we publish. So this idea that the thoughts expressed in the book are different, or the sentiments does not express what someone might think the author meant, is something that even I think S.N. Haskell or W.W. Prescott had a problem in evaluating. Yes, there is this letter. It was written October 28, 1903. If it is not Prescott's letter, it's written to J.H. Kellogg. So it says, it starts that we promised, you can see the letter, we promised you when you were here to look over the living temple and write you what we thought of it. When I first saw the book, I looked it through and wrote you what I thought of it, saying that the trend of it will never be received by Seventh-day Adventists. That might be Prescott writing to J.H. Kellogg. But if you have any questions or if you want to get these letters, you can reach us through our Facebook platform, E.J. Waggoner Theological Society. You just type, you search in the bar, E.J. Waggoner Theological Society, and then I think you'll be able to send us a message to receive these letters or to inquire about any information. So, but you asked us to mark out what we thought to be objectionable. That is, Kellogg did us this correspondent, that to mark out what was the problem, what was the expressions which were problem in the book, what was objectionable in the book. But you asked us to mark out what we thought to be objectionable and write you freely about it. Of course, all I have to say is on the theological trend of it. It is not so much later. It is not so much the expression which you used in the book as it is the standpoint from which it is written. Now listen to that. It is not, the problem is not the expression. The problem is the standpoint. What is the standpoint that you're writing from? What do you believe in private? That is the problem. The book in and of itself, the expression in and of themselves, to a larger degree, are not objectionable. Let that sink in. It is the standpoint from which it is written. So it appears to me. We could not mark out, now listen to this. We could not mark out any particular words or passages. Like they could not map it out. They could not mark out where the problem was using the words. But it means it is what Kellogg believed in private. That is his standpoint. That is the problem with the book Living Temple. And this has to be seen so that when we read Living Temple, for those who already read Living Temple, we do not throw away the baby with the bathwater, thinking that those expressions are entirely false. No. In fact, we had read that in our second, third session, we had seen that E.G. White even recognized that the teachings there as regards to God in nature were true. The only thing which was false was that Kellogg was trying to put God in nature in an extreme view, as we are seeing even in the present letter that we are reading, that E.G. White wrote to A.G. Daniels. Letter 271, B, 1903. We could not mark out any particular words or passages unless it be where you make God. Okay, this is just the one point which I think was even removed when the book Living Temple was edited into Miracle of Life in 1904. Like we could only mark out except unless it be where you make God such a monstrosity that you yourself or anyone else will not believe in him. This is where Kellogg had removed the pin and the pillar of our foundation. He had denied the idea that God was what? God was in the form of man. And I think we can read that how the spirit of prophecy made a crisis. We have read that. We have seen where Spicer say that to think of God, this is how the spirit of prophecy made a crisis by W.S. Spicer. To think of God as having a form in the image of which man was made was said to be idolatry. And so that is what was the objectionable feature in Living Temple, that this correspondent could see, unless it be where you make God such a monstrosity that you yourself or anyone else could not believe in him. The impression which I received from it, and which others received from it, as I have learned since, was the indefinite way in which you left the subject when you spoke of God in nature. There's an equivocal way that Kellogg presented this doctrine. Is pantheism. Like, it was a vague, indefinite way, so that it is difficult to really see unless you are aided by the light of the spirit of prophecy. I believe it was D.H. Kress also who said that unless he had read the spirit of prophecy, he could not have seen the problem with the writings, with the book Living Temple. So we thank God for the spirit of prophecy, because it is the only lenses, it is the only telescope or microscope, or it is the only goggles or spectacles that we are going to use if we are ever going to see correctly on the thin line between truth and error in the book Living Temple, so that we uphold the truth with confidence and reject the error with the force that it deserves. The impression which I receive of it and which others receive of it, as I have learned since, was the indefinite way in which you left the subject when you spoke of God in nature. The impression that I got from it was that you did not believe there was a personal God. Personal God. Personal God means you do not believe in a God which man was created in his form. Now, I do not mean by this that anyone can comprehend God in his attributes of greatness and infinity, but the impression anyone will get from the book is that no man can comprehend the fact of his personality. Now, this is untrue. Now, listen to that. No man can comprehend the fact of his personality. That is what you get from the idea that Kellogg tries to present in that book. Now, this is untrue, and that is true. And because it was removing the pin and a pillar from the foundation of the Adventist truth on the personality of God. This is a truth that is captured very wonderfully in the book Forgotten Pillar by Marjan Gagori and Michael Preskan. You can find it in www.forgottenpillar.com. You can find it free copy there. But the impression anyone will get from the book is that no one can comprehend the fact of his personality. Now, this is untrue and contrary to all the teaching of the Bible. While Moses and Solomon taught by the dwelling place on earth, which they built, there was a personality and an actual place of God in heaven. Yet, by his divine attributes, they both and the Bible teach that the heaven and the heaven cannot contain him. That is, by divine attributes, he is everywhere present. And the Spirit is an attribute of God. It is not God. So, the Spirit which conveys all other attributes of God, like his character, his wisdom, his intelligence, his omniscience, his omnipotency, It is the Spirit that conveys all those things to all nature and to all creation. And the Spirit is diffused through all nature. But God and His Son, Jesus Christ, are seated in heaven. If we take the wings of the morning and go to the uttermost part of the earth, or make our bed in hell, or to any part of the universe, He is there, and His providence will be over us. So this author is really putting his finger on the problem. The problem is not the expression. And there is only one point which he was in the living temple, which was revised in the miracle of life and was removed actually. That was the only objectionable point that he recognizes. And so it is the standpoint which Kellogg is writing, which is the problem. So let's continue on with this letter. So let's just recap the last paragraph. The enemy has put it into Dr. Kellogg's mind, the very words that I speak, so that his ideas can be sent forth as ideas exactly similar to those that I have taught. Thus, it is claimed that the teachings of the book Living Temple are in accordance with the teachings of my writings. There is a similarity of expression, it is true, and many of the words are the same as the words used by me in writing out the instructions that God has given me in regards to God in nature. And the position taken in this book can be interpreted by a mind under the deception of Satan to be exactly as the position taken in my writings. Now, that is very important. If you think that because there are similarity of expression, the standpoint that E.G. White has been writing on is the same as the standpoint that Kellogg was writing on, then you are under the deception of Satan. But this is not so. My words are interpreted to mean almost opposite of their real meaning. This confuses the minds of brethren and sisters in our church. Dr. Paulson is becoming confused. He thinks he understands Dr. Kellogg's teaching, but he does not discern who is Dr. Kellogg's instructor. Now listen to that. I am bidden to say to our people, do not confound the words of Sister White with the deceptive fallacies of the enemy. Extreme views. Now, what are the extreme views? It is not that there is a problem with the doctrine of God in nature or the indwelling of Christ and the Father by the Spirit in nature. That is not the problem. The problem is that view taken to an extreme position, such as to deny the personality of God, that he does not have a form like man, and also to make God to be a diffuse perfume throughout nature. That is the extreme view of God in nature. Now, E.G. White says the extreme views of God in nature undermine the foundation truth of the personality of God and the ministration of angels. A confused mass of spiritualistic ideas take the place of faith in a personal God. I take no stock whatsoever in some of the principles that are now being advocated. Amen. Let's continue. Paragraph 4. For advocating similar ideas, now listen to this. Dr. Kellogg was reproved shortly after he connected with the sanitarium. Now listen, Kellogg these ideas were not new. Anyone who reads the history of Pantheism, E.G. White, we had seen even in our earlier sessions that E.G. White had been condemning these views. For advocating similar views, ideas, Dr. Kellogg was reproved shortly after he connected with the sanitarium. Let Dr. Paulson take heed that he be not deceived. Now, Paulson was also in a riskful situation, as we had seen also Waggoner. Let Dr. Paulson take heed that he be not deceived. He may say Sister White's own words are repeated in Dr. Kellogg's teaching. And so many people, I may say also, have said Waggoner's words have been repeated in Living Temple. Many people have said that. Or they have said W.W. Prescott, A.T. Jones, all Paulsons, prior to 1903. People have said, oh, but the words and writings of Waggoner have repeated in Living Temple. Take care lest you be deceived. True, and that is true. E.G. White recognizes that is true. And Waggoner, I think I may say in his behalf, that is true. His words are repeated in Living Temple. His thoughts, his sentiments are repeated. The question is a question of standpoint. From which standpoint is Kellogg writing, and from which standpoint is Waggoner writing? And in 1897, if at all Waggoner was writing from the pantheistic standpoint, and that means that he had been receiving what? He was propagating error. How could the spirit of prophecy be silent? For advocating similar ideas, Dr. Kellogg was reproved shortly. If Dr. Kellogg was reproved, immediately he started to embrace those ideas. Why was Waggoner not reproved before that time? Why was Waggoner not reproved by the spirit of prophecy when he began to teach those things in 1897, as we had seen George R. Knight is claiming? Why was he not reproved? And far from being reproved, he was endorsed. And I found another letter by A.T. Jones writing to Lasson. Lasson had rejected the message of Minneapolis, and 10 years later, he was still having a problem with understanding the truth about the law in Galatians. And so A.T. Jones writes to him. You can see the letter, April 13, 1900. Dear Brother Lasson. So here A.T. Jones is writing to Lasson. Lasson is having a problem on what is the law in Galatians and the whole question of the covenant. And A.T. Jones writes a very interesting thing about the Present Truth periodical. He writes to, where is it? Another thing, yes, here. Another thing, Sister White herself, no, it's 0.4. Yeah. Another thing, year before last, this is written in 1900. So a year before the last year, that is before 1999, was 1898. Sorry. Another thing, the year before last, that is in 1898, in the Present Truth of London, Brother E.J. Waggoner printed studies on the book of Galatians throughout. And nothing was said definitely as to what he said on Galatians. Yet it is true that in a letter to him in that year, that is in August 1898, Sister White said, and I read it, we think Present Truth is the best of all our papers. Now listen to that. If Waggoner was a pantheist in the book of Galatians, as some want it to be, a narrative in our history, how the spirit of prophecy, far from condemning the Present Truth, endorses it that this is the best book. You can imagine, E.G. White even refused when Kellogg tried to revise the book. E.G. White says that book cannot be published by our people and propagated as a wonderful production to be read and studied as a spiritual material for our people. E.G. White refused. Miracle of Life by J.H. Kellogg, a revision of Living Temple. E.G. White refused. So how could she, if Waggoner was speaking from a pantheistic standpoint in 1898, how could she say that we think the Present Truth is the best of all our papers? And can you okay, this is also another point that will be emphatic. Yet another thing, perhaps you have seen the announcement in the Signs of the Times as to the Sabbath school lessons of the latter part of this year and onward. That is the year 1900 and 1901. The person who was going to write the Sabbath school lesson was E.J. Waggoner. Perhaps you have seen an announcement in the Signs of the Times as to the Sabbath school lesson of the latter part of this year and onward, and that they are to be a study on the book of Galatians, and that the Sabbath school quarterly for use in the study of these lessons will be the book of Galatians by E.J. Waggoner. Thus, the Sabbath school lesson beginning July 1st, 1901 are to be on the book of Galatians, and they are written by Waggoner. Now, those Sabbath school lessons, before they are adopted and issued, are distributed in copies to leading brethren in all the parts of the world for their suggestion and criticism, etc. And since the Sabbath School Association is to issue these for the study of Sabbath school for July and forward, this shows that they have been considered by living brethren everywhere. Therefore, you see, if the review is, as you say, made the channel for sowing the seeds of discord and division and error, the Sabbath schools, the whole world round will be at the same thing the 1st of July and onward, and with the approval too of the living brethren in all the world. For although I have not seen the lessons and did not have the chance to read Waggoner's studies in Present Truth, yet you know as well as I that in substance those Sabbath school lessons will teach as to Galatians exactly what is going through the review. Now, E.T. Jones is saying that Waggoner is the author of these lessons. These lessons in Galatians are going to be based on his book, The Glad Tidings, and they are going to be read the world over. Now, I want you to think about this. what if after writing The Living Temple, because if you say that Waggoner was a pantheistic in 1897, and you see how he was treated after that in his materials, as in the periodical that he wrote, in the Sabbath school lesson, what if Kellogg was given the opportunity to write, a Sabbath school lesson based on the book Living Temple? What will that mean? What will that mean? So if you put how Waggoner was treated by SOP and the church, and Waggoner's doctrines by the church, and how Kellogg was treated with this book Living Temple by SOP and the church, then you can see clearly that these people are not teaching the same thing, unless God is a liar, or unless God doesn't care. But as long as God lives, when we juxtapose how Waggoner is treated in his doctrine and his material, and how Kellogg is treated after publishing Living Temple by the church and the SOP, we can see clearly that these people indeed are not teaching the same thing. And so Waggoner's material, Glad Tidings, was endorsed by the old church. And SOP could not have been silent if the enemy of souls was the one who had taught Waggoner what he was teaching then. SOP would not have been silent, as when she was not silent when Kellogg was teaching Pantheism. So we can, in confidence, study Waggoner, because there is a full endorsement of the spirit of prophecy. What we need to see is pray for the spirit to discern the difference between Glad Tidings, that is the book that Waggoner wrote on Galatians, and the Living Temple position. It is my prayer. So let's see if we can conclude with this letter. So, Brother Daniels, it says, I earnestly desire that this matter shall be dealt with in God's own way. Be very cautious. Do not precipitate a crisis. Work silently. I am bidden by the Lord. Do not converse with Dr. Kellogg or write to him direct, for his mind is controlled as it is by Satan. Now, if Waggoner was controlled by Satan, how was his periodical the best paper published by our people if they were teaching the same thing as Kellogg? Because the person who will teach these things is a person who is under the control of the serpent. The person who teaches Pantheism is under the control of the serpent who deceived Adam and Eve. So, because his mind is as it is controlled by Satan. In such a condition that is liable to put wrong construction on my words. To you, Brother Daniels, and to your fellow rebels, I will say, quit ye like men, be strong, make no raid against anyone, for you are warring not against men, but against principalities and powers. Put on the whole armor of God, not forgetting the gospel shoes. Keep close to the Lord, cling to the standard, pray and strive for victory. And so by this contrast, by putting Kellogg and his theology in Living Temple, and Waggoner in his theology in Glad Tidings in present truth, by putting them in juxtaposition and side by side, and seeing how the spirit of prophecy gave, how the spirit of prophecy in the entire church gave their position, we can see the great contrast that we cannot apply the same sentiments that SOP even applied to. We cannot apply the same sentiments that SOP applies to Kellogg. For example, okay. Like, for example, this one. Can you apply this to Waggoner? Like, Christ never causes confusion. He says, I will surely bring punishment upon those who put themselves in a place to control the minds of my blood-bought heritage. For thus they endeavor the souls of those who have purchased with the price of my blood. Okay. Yeah, like this one. Yeah. Let's just read this one as our last quote. Soon after Dr. Kellogg connected with the sanitarium, I was shown that he was in danger of entertaining false views of God. So SOP was not blind to Kellogg's pantheism. Like, that is the special point that E.G. White was being given instruction upon. So he could not have ignored it in Waggoner as early as 1897. She could not have ignored it. Soon after Kellogg first connected with the sanitarium, I was shown that he was in danger of entertaining false views of God. I labored with him, telling him that his case had been presented to me and that I have been shown just what the holding of such ideas will lead to. That is letter 214, 1903. This is also another letter 220, 1903. I told A.T. Jones that which the Lord has presented to me in regard to the source from which Doctor was receiving his education in these seductive theories. Now listen, the theories that Kellogg was teaching were from Satan himself. So if Waggoner was teaching the same thing, do you want to tell me that the spirit of prophecy will be silent or will be blind? Or the spirit of prophecy will say that the present truth is the best paper published by our people? And will the spirit of prophecy allow Waggoner, through the Sabbath school lessons of 1901, to teach Pantheism all through the world? Saying, nay, my answer is nay. I told him that our brother was under the influence of satanic agencies, and for so long a time, and had been walking away from the principle of truth and righteousness, that he had been entangled and had in himself no power to escape the snare of the enemy. So we can see that Kellogg was under the control of the enemy. We find no such expressions as regards to Waggoner's writings prior to that time. So it is my prayer that we may see our history clearly, and as I close, we may take this warning that E.G. White says to A.G. Daniels and to Paulson, do not confound the words of Sister White with the deceptive fallacies of the enemy. I will say, do not confound the words of E.J. Waggoner with the deceptive fallacies of the enemy. May God bless you, and we can pray as we close. Father in heaven, we thank you for the light that you've given us as regards to our history. May we hold on to them. May we understand them in the mind of the Spirit, so that we may not be deceived as our pioneers and those people who were ministers of the gospel and the physicians were deceived. May you uphold us, and may you prepare us for your second coming, which is close at hand. May I decrease as you increase, and may all honor and glory redound unto thy holy name. For I pray this, trusting and believing in the precious name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
So, be blessed. Have a blessed time.